Can you tell the story of this boy, Wadi Al-Fayoum? He's a 6-year-old Palestinian-American boy who was stabbed 26 times in his home in Plainfield Township, Illinois. It was found to be a hate crime motivated by Islamophobia. And the attacker said, "You Muslims must die."
So before Wadir was killed on a Saturday. It was the immediate Saturday after October 7th. I remember on Friday, media starts to reach out to every imam in the country, every Muslim leader in the country, and say, what are you going to do about this global day of jihad? What are you going to do about the global day of jihad? It's like, what are you talking about? It's like, well, Hamas has called for a global day of jihad. So how are you going to stop Muslims from attacking people? Right? So it's Friday, and I'm like, well, this is the first I'm hearing from you. And I remember responding to a local reporter. Most people I just ignored. I responded to a local reporter. I said, I've got people in my community that have already lost 10, 15 relatives at that point. Now it's 20, 30. And you haven't said a word. And now you're reaching out to me about the potential violence of Muslims in America. This is great. This is just like 9/11, right? What are you going to do to restrain you angry Muslims from responding to what's happening overseas and responding to the call of a global day of jihad? Guess what? That night, this man takes out a military knife and attacks a 6-year-old boy. A 6-year-old Palestinian boy. By the way, it gets worse the more details that you know. And I recently had a chance to go and speak to his mom because she was in the hospital when I was there for the funeral. So I had a chance to visit her not too long ago.
And she was attacked also.
She was attacked first. It was actually their landlord. So Hanan, the mother, was at home with Wadir, 6-year-old boy. Landlord comes in and with absolutely no emotion just charges at her. Starts with her. She was able to fight him off. He stabbed her initially 7 or 8 times with a military-grade knife. She fought him off, escaped to call 911. And while she's calling 911, she hears Wadir. Wadir ran up to the man, calling him Uncle Joe, because the landlord prior to that had been kind to them. Used to give Wadir toys. Wadir had an infectious, beautiful smile. Every picture you see of that kid, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful smile. And so Wadir runs up to him, says, Uncle Joe. He runs up to him to give him a hug, even though he's carrying a military-grade knife with blood on it, because Wadir doesn't believe that harm can come to him from that man. And Hanan didn't think that he would do anything to her kid. Even in that fit of rage, the last thing that she says she heard was, oh no. You know, Wadir says, oh no. And then he starts to stab him 26 times. Says, you Muslims must die. Usually in a scene like that, police are hesitant to classify something as a hate crime. It was classified as a hate crime the very same day. The thing is that who's complicit in that hate crime? What filled that man's head for him to believe that he was doing an act of good by murdering a 6-year-old Palestinian boy? And in reality, Uncle Joe was motivated by President Joe Biden, who repeated a debunked report that there were 40 beheaded Israeli babies. And he said, I saw 40 beheaded Israeli babies. The White House walked it back. Afterwards, in a statement that no one reads because it was factually false. But Uncle Joe heard it and had been binge watching media about these violent Palestinians. And suddenly, the propaganda overcame his own humanity and what he knew of that family. And he went in and ruined their lives. And, you know, now, you know, just like any mom, you know, she hasn't moved a thing. His bike is still in the same place it was. His toys are still in the same place. She's left with this great void, this great emptiness. If that was the only crime, it would be enough to wake this country up and say, oh no, this is not where we need to go. Oh no, right? The last thing she heard him say was, oh no. If that was it, and I got the news, by the way, when I was ironically at a protest. We were protesting on Saturday, downtown Dallas, and I started getting all these texts about what happened in Chicago. Oh no, right? Like, no Muslims attacked anyone. The media was in a frenzy over the global day of jihad. I got called by national news outlets and local news outlets. What are you going to do about Muslims that are going to turn into monsters and start killing people in the streets? Next thing we know, we have a dead 6-year-old Palestinian boy. I went to his funeral, and that kind of speaks to the proximity part of things. Yeah, it felt like stepping into Gaza, right? For a moment, it didn't feel like America. Didn't feel like America. Felt like stepping into Gaza. His casket was wrapped in a Palestinian flag. There was not just sadness at his funeral, but a deep sense of anger. At the funeral, some of his family members shouted out, "Joe Biden, you did this. Joe Biden, you did this." And you know, I remember the next day, it was right after the funeral, looking at the front page of CNN, and the story of Wadir was buried in the last section, and it was right over all these meaningless ads. And I thought to myself, that's it. Like, if this was an Arab man, let's be real, let's be honest here. If this was a Palestinian landlord that stabbed a 6-year-old Jewish boy to death, this would have gotten more attention. It would have been the front page of the news, and rightfully so. People would have grieved over the insanity of stabbing a 6-year-old boy 26 times. Wadir became an afterthought the very next day. And so it's an extension of the bigotry, an extension of the racism. And there's so much that happens after that. There's the terrible stabbing of Detroit synagogue president Samantha Wall. And it's horrible. She was stabbed in her driveway. Immediately, front page of all the news outlets. Immediately, it's the main news story. And immediately the implications are, there go the Muslims. The Palestinians have lost their minds. The Muslims they are who we thought they were, right? That's what it is. They are who we thought they were. They went and they stabbed a synagogue president. It turned out it wasn't a hate crime, although it's an awful crime. It turned out it wasn't a hate crime. Wadir is an afterthought. I had people reach out to me afterwards expressing condolences. And I responded to them, those who have justified the genocide in Gaza, but that were somehow offering condolences for Wadir, privately, of course. You know, by the way, if a Muslim would have committed that crime, every single Muslim leader would have had press in front of their door to condemn that crime. We would have all been made complicit. I had people reach out to me, say, "I'm sorry about what happened with Wadir. It's terrible. You know, I saw you at the funeral, praying for you." My response was, what's the difference between Wadir and a boy in Gaza? What's the difference between me and Wadir? I'm a Palestinian child. My parents made it out of Palestine. I was born in this country. If I didn't have the opportunity to grow up here and to become the person that I became, you would have been justifying my murder right now. You would have been okay with my genocide. You would have been giving the talking points to the press to erase me. But you feel sorry because Wadir was killed. And I think this is when we say that anti-Palestinian bigotry is an extension of Islamophobia. If a mosque gets targeted here, people rightfully rush to protect that mosque and say this is horrible and it shouldn't happen. But when you have an Israeli soldier bombing a mosque and laughing like a maniac on video, and it's going viral on TikTok, and there's no way to rein that in, and you don't have a word of condemnation about it, in fact, you are standing in the way of a ceasefire, then you're a hypocrite. There's no way around it. You are a hypocrite. What's the difference between a mosque here and a mosque there? What's the difference between a Palestinian life here and a Palestinian life there? If you're okay with me being murdered there, don't say that you care about my life here. And so that hypocrisy has been laid bare. We have said multiple times, masks are falling. Masks are falling. People that we thought were decent people somehow have found it in themselves to justify a genocide there is no shortage at this point of videos. And again, when I could have made the excuse for you maybe in the first few weeks, that you hadn't seen enough. But with all social media suppression across all platforms, there isn't a single platform that hasn't suppressed Palestinian voices. With all that suppression, there are enough videos at this point of children whose heads have been blown off, of children walking around without limbs, of parents carrying their kids in bags, not body bags. I mean, grocery bags, because they don't even have body bags, and screaming out and saying, "Why are you doing this to me? Make it stop." And you come back and you tell that person, it's Hamas's fault. Where is your humanity? Where is your sense of decency? Isn't that the logic of the so-called terrorism that you condemn? Yeah, well, you can wipe out entire populations. You should have talked to Hamas. It's Hamas's fault. All the kids in the West Bank, where does this end? So what are your moral boundaries here, right? So if that's the logic that you're okay with, then in that case, when there's a mass shooter in a school in the United States, just bomb the whole school. In fact, bomb the whole town if you can't find the mass shooter. Where does this end for you, right? And so when I say people have lost their humanity, they're killing us overseas, but their hearts are dying. People have lost their humanity. They've lost any sense of morality and their moral boundaries. And being there and I mean, participating in his funeral, it was anger. I'm not used to that. I'm an imam. I pastor to people. I went to Christ Church, and that was the worst I'd ever seen before, where 50 Muslims were killed by a white supremacist. And he murdered them with such callousness. And I remember being at those funerals. And yeah, I mean, there was anger, but it was just profound sadness, because at least the rest of the world could all come out in one voice and say, that's wrong. Now, most of the world sees what's happening in Gaza and says, this is disgusting. Most of the world sees this and says, this is a genocide. But we happen to live in this bubble here where we're constantly being told we did this to ourselves. And that's the same logic that led to our initial expulsion, 1948. What was the crime of those 700,000 Palestinians that were driven out of their home in 1948? What did they do? They did not commit the Holocaust. They didn't have a mass murder of Jews at their hands. What did they do? What crime were they paying for? And so it's been the consistent theme. This is the story of our people, not since October 7th. This is the story of our people for the last 75 years.